you have different descriptions. If you think about the Shemona Esrei, the silent prayer, you have 3 blessings of praise, and you have 6 blessings where you make private petitions for you, for your community, for your time. And then there are 6, really 7 more, which are national. I talk about national, and you go up to the final redemption. Now, if you look at the order of the blessings there, you'll see that the very last blessing is coming of Moshiach, the last one, at the end. Not coming back to the land, and not restoring justice, and not rebuilding Yerushalayim. And that's based on the Gemara Megillah. That is one possible scenario where the Mashiach comes at the end. And it's all been done already. There are other possible scenarios. That's why the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim says the descriptions of the Messianic era are based on verses in the Tanakh, some in the Torah and many in the prophets. And the verses are vague and ambiguous and difficult to understand. And the Rambam says we have no oral tradition. And therefore, he says we're thrown back on the verses we don't understand, and therefore, we don't know exactly how it's going to happen until it happens. And he says, furthermore, it's not appropriate to invest time and effort studying these matters because they don't add to awe of Hashem and they don't add to the love of Hashem. Study how to do His will, study how to understand His Torah, and leave that to experience it when it comes. And we find in the Talmud different attitudes towards it. 2 of the Talmudic sages, the Amoraim, said, let him come, let the Mashiach come, and let me not see him. Because there is a prediction of a very disastrous war with many casualties, which again, no one is saying it has to happen, but it can happen. It's one of the, and they said, well, they're afraid of the test that will be they'll have to pass in living through those events. The Torah is very realistic about human psychology and human limitations, and being realistic is to recognize that it's a complex phenomenon and has different dimensions. There was a time many years ago when I perused some of psychology, and I think it's fair to say that the popular schools of psychological explanation and therapy each one has some truth in it, and each one makes the mistake of taking the some truth and making it the whole truth. There's not a sufficient appreciation for how complex and subtle the human being is, to the extent that we really don't understand very well what the human being is doing. And if you reduce a human being to a formula, whether it be Freud or whether it be Adler or whether it be Jung or whether it be existentialist therapy, if you reduce it to a formula, it's definitely not correct. It may have part of the truth, but because human beings aren't reducible to a formula like that. Even the one who has 64 different categories of people, and you can mold your picture. Miriam Adahan, who wrote about this, writes carefully and says, I'm not saying the categories are exact. I'm not saying that you push people into the categories. They guide your thinking. They guide your evaluation. But if you see people who straddle 2 categories or in some other condition, you have to accept it and realize that it's only an aid. It's not really a complete description. Now, I'll just give you an illustration of this. The Gemara says that there are times when it is appropriate to pray that someone should die. Gemara Nedarim. When is that? When he's got an incurable medical condition and he's in pain. Then, now of course, you can't take this as a general rule. You have to ask a rabbi to think about a particular case. It depends on the details. But there is such a category of people where you would pray that they should die. So my Rebbe Zatzal, who was in personal contact with all the great scholars of the age, when he went to visit them, he always prepared a question, to hear what this great scholar would say. And he went to Rav Shach Zatzal and asked him this question. Rav Shach said the following: when a person is in terminal disease and suffering terrible pain, he's undergoing a test of his emunah, his trust in God and his belief in God. And you're praying that he should be released from that test. And the example in the Gemara is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the author of the Mishnah. the one whom we call our holy rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. He was the one who, when he was terminal and he was in terrible pain, the whole yeshiva was praying that he should be saved, he should live, and his servant, his maidservant, was praying he should die. But because the whole yeshiva was praying, her prayers couldn't compete, so she caused a disturbance which distracted the yeshiva, and then her prayers went through, and he died. And the Gemara says she was right and they were wrong. And from that, the Ran says there in the Dorim that there are times when we do pray that someone should die. Now, simplistically you could say, yeah, but isn't all of life about being tested? And when you respond to the test and you pass the test, that's life's biggest success. What do you mean you want to be reserved from the test? Yeah? When you do succeed, it's a great victory and you've accomplished a great deal. But also, there's a risk that it won't go well. And that risk has to be taken seriously. The Gemara has several cases where Tanoim were suffering, and another Tana came to visit who had some special merit, and the visitor said, "Do you want this suffering?" And the patient said, "I don't want the suffering and I don't want the reward." Lo hein v'lo schara. And then the visitor did something, prayed, and the suffering was relieved. So they themselves were realistic about what it means to stand in front of such a test. And we, every morning in the Holy Siddur, say, don't bring us into a test. So you ask, well, what do you say? You're going to give up your life? Give up free will? Give up? No. One purpose that a test can have is for you to take a certain type of situation seriously, realize how serious it is, and to make an effort to overcome it. What's motivating a person to say to God, please don't test me? He already realizes that the thing is serious, and he realizes that the test may cause him to do something which isn't appropriate, and he's afraid of doing the thing that isn't appropriate. He's already learned that lesson. By the very fact that he's asking not to be tested, it shows that he's learned that lesson. Under those conditions, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could listen to the prayer. So I'm just pointing out that all these things which depend upon the psychology of the people at the time and what kind of effect it will have on them are very subtle, very deep, and that's why you'll have different opinions. And one has to be prepared to spend your time in indecision and doubt, because we're not going to have a clear total picture.